I'm just wondering what you are doing in order to move women into the political arena and how they're doing that.
Okay. The event on November 10th and 11th will concentrate on 4 specific issues, obviously because that's educational. First of all, let me go back, say something else, even before it concentrates on issues. I did an event in Los Angeles, I think a couple of years ago, I'm not sure. I get confused, a year or 2 ago, called Sister Giant, Awakening the Sleeping Giant of American Womanhood. And what I did was I took 3 films that they became kind of the markers of the day. And the film that I began with was something that was made by the Canadian Film Board out of their Women in Spirituality series. And this film is called The Burning Times. The second film that I showed throughout the weekend was a wonderful film made by an HBO film made a few years ago that everybody needs to see if you haven't, called Iron-Jawed Angels. It starred Hilary Swank and really is a wonderful dramatization of the history of the women's suffrage movement in the United States. The third film is Abigail Disney's film that I'm sure many of you have seen, called Pray the Devil Back to Hell, about what women have done in Liberia with a fraction of the power that you and I have, and how they've changed their country. Okay, now, the Burning Times has to do with the phenomenon called the burning of the witches. Historians believe might have been up to 800,000 women who were burned. And what was this? This was an effort by the early church to eradicate the passionate, free-thinking woman represented by pagan culture. This was also the beginning, the burning of the witches was also, by the way, the beginning of the environmental crisis. James was mentioning the environmental crisis. We are the only mammalian species that is systematically involved in destroying our own habitat. And once again, we know why. Because economic rather than humanitarian interests are the ordering principle of human civilization at this point. So the reason that the burning of the witches was the beginning of the environmental crisis was because these women, witches, wise women is what the word meant, were the ones who held aloft in their villages and in their communities the rituals that kept the consciousness of the people embedded in a sense of divine partnership with the rivers and the trees and the skies and the earth. And 2 things were meant to be happening. The early church wanted to eradicate these women, number 1, because they were seeking to introduce a dispensation where the idea of divine partnership with nature would be replaced by what they deemed a biblical injunction that God gave man dominion over nature. That's number 1. Number 2, they needed to get rid of pagan culture because pagan culture was held aloft in the consciousness of the West by these women and by a very passionate, free-thinking woman. Anytime you have any system that seeks control, it seeks to get rid of the passionate, free-thinking woman. Why? Because passionate, free-thinking women tend to raise passionate, free-thinking children. Passionate, free-thinking children tend to become passionate, free-thinking adults. And passionate, free-thinking adults are very difficult to manipulate and almost impossible to control. That is why. Now, if you have 300 years during which parents know that if their little girl displays any magic, any intuitive understanding of things, if her hands can heal, if she's demonstrating that she's got something, and those parents know what is happening to women who clearly have something, wouldn't those parents say to their little girls, shh, be beige, be very subtle. Don't show the power that you have. We have a cellular memory of a time when a woman simply expressing her power was punished savagely. In too many cases, it still is. We eradicated slavery. We still have not eradicated racism. We have eradicated the institutional oppression of women in the Western world. We still have not eradicated the projection of guilt and suspicion onto the passionate woman. All we've done is shifted the consonant from witch to bitch. So what has happened is that what is holding women back, we have the power to run for office, we have the power to take leadership positions, but the problem is what they say about us when we do, and the even sometimes unconscious ways that people will seek to cut us off at our knees. And so even though we have suffrage, even though we have the power to run for office, and even though in case after case, statistically, it's demonstrated that when women do run for office, we win at the same rates as men do. The chains that are holding us back are more internal. And you know, it's interesting when you look at all the brain studies that have been done about the feeling function and the thinking function in a man's brain versus a woman's. We lead with the feeling function. Now, this makes us stronger in politics, and it makes us more vulnerable. It makes us stronger because of the things that we care about. We don't want to hear the economic arguments until first we hear what are the babies being fed? Are the babies being fed? On the other hand, given how dark and dirty it's become in American politics, we are more vulnerable. We're likely to go to bed for 3 days when we feel humiliated and embarrassed, more than a guy will, for the most part. So the first part of November 10th will be a discussion about dismantling the internal chains that bind us, if we are to be the fierce mothers of our generation and of our world. The second part of that day will be speaking about the issues, a real education about the issues, having to do with child poverty in the United States. What kind of legislation would be necessary? Having to do with the risk of our children to the sex trade industry. What kind of legislation would be necessary? A real education about the incarceration rates in the United States, an understanding of the workings of the prison industrial complex and how the prison lobby keeps this situation in place and what it would take legislatively to change this, and also an education in the issue of Citizens United and the efforts now being made, legislative and otherwise, to override it both with federal legislation and through a constitutional amendment. The second day, Yale University, the Yale Campaign School, is actually sending 3 people out. This will be a marvelous opportunity. You don't have to go to New Haven, Connecticut. You can just go to Los Angeles, and you will have a day-long training. It's normally a 5-day training over there. You can have a day-long training in actually what it takes to either run for office or be involved in a very serious way in a woman's campaign. And, you know, I don't know if anybody here is supposed to run for office. That's not my business. But what I feel is my business is I would love to provide, to the best of my ability, a situation where you would leave the room knowing, I just might, because now I know how.